Hello, good day and welcome. My name is Richard Byron Cox. I'm the UNCCD's Capacity Building Officer. Today, I would want to introduce you to Module 1 of our course on the United Nations. This module deals with the history of the United Nations. Today, on the news, TV, radio, you hear a lot about the United Nations. It does this, it does that, the Secretary General said this, and so on and so forth. But where did it come from? How did we end up with this United Nations? In other words, what is its history? Well, the United Nations was born in 1945, actually at a conference in San Francisco in the United States. But what led to that? How did that happen? Well, you see, in 1914 to 1918, there was a war, the First World War, and that war caused the life of 50 million people. But outside of that, what did it do to the environment and the other consequences? It was destruction on a massive scale. And so the nations of the world decided that, no, we have to find a way to be able to talk to each other and to avoid this from happening again. So at the end of the war, in 1919, there was the Treaty of Versailles. And in that treaty, something called the League of Nations was created. And this League of Nations was where nations should come together, talk, discuss their problems, and so on and so forth, and try to find solutions without having to resort to war. However, it didn't work very well. And one of the reasons why it didn't work very well is that some major nations refused to join the League of Nations. So by 1933, this League of Nations really and truly wasn't as effective as the nations had hoped it will be. And so we had a problem. By 1939, a Second World War had broken out. And this time, it was a serious catastrophe, I mean, millions of people died again. And of course, there was untold challenges to the environment. So while this war was going on, somebody came up with the idea that we needed a new organization, a more effective organization that would prevent a Third World War, because the Second World War lasted from 1939 to 1945. And so the idea for a new organization was born. And there were different meetings and so on, which culminated in San Francisco in 1945, and a new United Nations was born. Its headquarters in the United States of America. Now, as I have said, the key issue here was always to prevent war. So the first and foremost task of this United Nations from 1945 right up to now was to guarantee international peace and security. That's it. That's its major function. And over the years, that is what it has worked upon. Now, in order to guarantee peace and security, one needs justice. And so the Charter of the United Nations, which was adopted in 1945, also include what is called the statutes or the norms, the rules of an International Court of Justice. This International Court of Justice is established and is located in The Hague. And its task is to deal with the question of international justice. Now, outside of that, because there are other factors which can influence peace and security, such as social and economic development, because when people are desperate, when people are hungry and so on and so forth, they resort to war, they resort to fighting. When people feel that justice economically and socially is not done to them, they resort to war. And so therefore, the Economic and Social Council was also created. And that became a key organ which advises the general body of the United Nations on issues of economic and social development, and so help in that process. But at that time, in 1945, when the United Nations was created, there were also many nations which were not independent. They were colonies, so to speak. And so a trusteeship council was created. And its main task was to help in decolonization. In other words, making these nations be able to become independent. Now that council doesn't really function anymore. The reason why is that most of these nations are now independent. A matter of fact, if you look at the United Nations in 1945, it only had about 50 members. Now it has 193 members. So you see, that whole decolonization process really did work. But there are other factors which affects peace and security in this world. For example, as I said before, justice and people's rights. When people feel that their rights are being denied them, they take actions to guarantee those rights. And in order to address that question, the United Nations also works on the question of human rights. As a matter of fact, in 1948, there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All of this was done under the auspices of the United Nations. So here you go again, where the United Nations is paying attention to a crucial matter which could affect international peace and security. So you have a situation where the original United Nations, up to the 1950s, so to speak, addressed these fundamental questions of peace and security through addressing international law, through addressing development issues, through addressing the question of decolonization, through addressing the question of human rights. But now, today, the United Nations must evolve because life evolves. Situations at the international level has changed. And so that organization must change to reflect these changes. Today, as we know, one of the fundamental questions that we face is the question of the protection of the environment, the very survival of this planet. So we cannot deal with just development anymore. What we have to deal with is something called sustainable development. And the United Nations is playing a key role in this. Okay? So for example, as you know, the climate change treaty is called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change because it was done under the auspices of the United Nations. I am speaking to you from the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Again, you see the role of the United Nations and so on and so forth in these areas. But outside of that, in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which is sometimes also referred to as Agenda 2030. Where we, the peoples of the world, are trying to ensure that the development that takes place from here on in is development that continues for the foreseeable future, so that the future of the planet and the future of the younger generations is guaranteed. So all of these questions are questions which the United Nations tackle. Why? Because it is the task of the United Nations to try and ensure international peace and security. Some of the other issues that it's presently tackling are issues such as migration. As we know, there's huge migration going on because of climate change, because of wars, because of many other factors. And so the United Nations work on these questions. Now, the point is this, therefore, that from 1945 up to now, this United Nations, with all its flaws or weaknesses, as you might want to say, continues to work to ensure international peace and security. It has a history of from 1945 to now that says it has guaranteed or has helped to guarantee that we didn't have a third world war. Now, you might say, oh, but there are so many conflicts. There have been 200 major conflicts since 1945. That is quite true. The issue, however, is this, that today we have nuclear weapons. We had them since the 1940s, and they can destroy this planet. And the United Nations has done a lot in terms of guaranteeing that this has not happened so far. I would like to advise you to read the additional materials that we have provided. Take this part of the course. I wish you every success with it. My name is Richard Byron Cox. See you next time.